this session, be sure and interrupt when something comes along, because this is for you. 2 points. How to launch an initiative from the company's point of view, how to get an initiative started. That's what we'll cover. So I hope I'll get through those. So first of all, let's go through this. This is essentially, if we were having a breakout, I put a breakout in here, but it's your homework assignment. The last thing down at number 5. Nagwag principles. That came out when I was writing the book. We got tired of saying no greatness without goodness, because that's a lot of words, and so the publisher created an acronym for it. Nagwag, no greatness without goodness. So it makes sense once you know it. So it's a lot easier to say it. And it's in the book. If you do ever buy the book or get the book, you can get it on Kindle, you can get it on Amazon, you can get it at the bookstore. We'll go through those real quick. Field of Dreams. There's 2 approaches to this. That's number 2. And I'm going to jump to number 3 pretty quick. Think about this. I'm going to ask you about number 3 there. All these things are necessary to a successful initiative. Resources, the desire, the authority, a plan, the know-how, the opportunity for hiring people in your organization, that report to you. All those things, I think everybody would agree, were important. If you could pick one, what would it be? So you don't have to say it now, but everybody's going to get to vote when we get to that question. Does everybody understand that part? Resources, desire, authority, plan, know-how. If you could only have one, what do you think is the most critical ingredient? And this has gone. There's a lot of members of the club, and we talk to each other, and we have an answer to this question that we believe. And it'll be interesting to see how we line up. All right, so let's go real quickly, and we'll go through the Nagwag principles. And it says right there, discuss them in more detail in the book, buy it, you'll like it. That's the only ad. I'm a terrible promoter. This is about all the promotion you're going to get. But when I wrote the book, I wrote 2 sections in the end, 2 appendices. How do you get started? And I put some principles in there, and then it said, as a parent, if you have a child with a disability, what are the things you need to look at, or what we learn from our experience? One is have a champion. No champion, no initiative. No champion, no initiative. It requires a champion. Every change requires a champion. This is a change. If we just are looking for more qualified candidates, we're going to have the same results as we always had. Doing the same thing, same results. This is about change. Set a goal and monitor relentlessly. There's kind of a no-brainer in this, but it's surprising how many people will start an initiative. For any other initiative, they will have measures and timing and all that kind of thing, but many people let's just hire some people there. We're in business. We do know how to, project management is what we're good at. Why wouldn't we apply the same skills we have in the regular, normal, traditional role as we would this role? Go big, inspire and identify invisible barriers. Go big. What I mean by that, I have a lot of people would call me up. I remember the president of Clark Shoes called me up. He says, we want to do this. And I said, how many people are you thinking about hiring? And he said, we're thinking about hiring about 25 people, disabilities. And I said, what kind of disabilities do you have in mind? And he kind of described them. And I said, here's my only advice to you. Take your number, whatever you're starting with, and double it. And whatever range of disabilities you're thinking about, double it. Because that's what we found. You can go twice as big as you think you can. And when you go big, it doesn't inspire somebody. And like in my story, a lot of the story I told you today, I told to the organization. Because they had to be inspired to do this. They had to realize nobody had done this in the world, and if we've done this, we could be a model for the world. That's a truth. That's an inspiring, because people will do one thing for mission. They do very little for money. But something with meaning, That gets to the discretionary effort. Nobody jumps on a grenade for a stockholder. But when it's for something bigger than themselves, that's what this can be about. And with that inspiration comes a lot of creativity. And the invisible barriers, I talked about that a lot. We have a lot of them. They're unintentional, but they're barriers nonetheless. One of the ones is the way we regard people with disabilities. All of us, I believe, or let me speak for myself. Maybe nobody has this. I have lots of prejudices. I'm very judgmental. And I'm judgmental. And when I started this, I was the same way about people with disabilities. And I cover that judgmentalism of not thinking they're an equal to me, or they're not completely worthy, or never worthy of my job, because I cover it with sympathy and love. My other prejudices I'm confronted with, I know I'm being judgmental, but I have a blind spot when it comes to people with disabilities because I love them so, and I have so much sympathy for them. But at the same time, I don't see them as an equal. That's why those become invisible barriers, and they're in our processes that we're unaware of, unintentionally. Bias for action, not planning. I'm going to talk about that in an approach. Don't underestimate. Stretch, ask the person. Keep the same standards in place, same performance standards. Don't start doing with carve-outs. If you're going to do this, you're going to be a showcase, and you don't want to have to give up on any performance. There are people out there with disabilities who can do just as well as anybody else. There are people who are just can never get through that last bit, who come within 10 inches or 2 inches of the surface but are still drowning. Don't lower standards. Open the door wider. Keep fear in check. That's the number one impediment. When I talk to other executives, what was the biggest impediment to doing this? Fear. What if we make a mistake? What if we get sued? What if somebody gets hurt? What if we fail? It goes on and on. People look at a glass either half full or half empty. A lot of people look at it half empty. And when we're confronted with those questions, and they'll come from everywhere, don't blow them off, engage them. What's the risk? If somebody says, what's the risk? What if we get sued? Do we ever get sued anyway? And what would we get being sued for? And other people have done this. What's their experience in getting sued? Because there's facts around this. What happens if a parent complains? Have we ever had a family member complain about anybody? All those kind of things. What if somebody gets hurt? Do we have people get hurt? What's the evidence say about the cost? Explore it. Take it all the way down. And then at the end, the operator's going to say, I'm responsible for this. That's what having the champion in the operation. That was what was able to trump a lot of those discussions. I'm the one who's responsible for the results. I'm the one that's ultimately responsible for the working conditions and the working environment, and that's my responsibility. I need your help in executing that, but let's make no mistake. This is a failure, it's my mistake. That gives people the courage or the confidence to go forward. The thing about leadership, I will say about, and I know we all observe this, my favorite story is one of Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, everybody knows the story about her? Didn't end up that well. But they made her a saint 500 years later, so I guess she felt good about that. She was an uneducated girl in France who had a dream that she was going to restore the back to his crown. They were in this war, became 30 years war with England. She had this dream, a vision, said an angel came to her and the king heard about it, so she went to the court and told him about that in such a way, in a convincing way, so he put her with all these generals. You always see pictures of Joan of Arc in the armor and stuff, so he put her with his generals. And the first battle there was at Orleans. And she's with the council, and they're going to say, okay, our plan is we're going to hold the city under siege. That's what works the best. We starve them out, it's the most effective, long term. We'll make it. Just no, we need to attack. We need to attack in the morning, first thing. And they said, no, you don't understand. We have a lot of experience with this. You don't know anything about battle, wars. We got this. I said, no, we need to attack in the morning. They said, if you attack, nobody will follow you. And she said, then I won't look back. And she started off the next morning armed with not a sword or a spear, only the flag of France. And they did follow her, and the city fell. Leaders need to make sure they're going to go no matter who follows. Now, sometimes it's like you got to look back and make sure they're still there sometimes. But that kind of commitment empowers everybody else, because everybody wants this to happen. Make no mistake. Everybody would like this to be successful. It's the fear. Start where the local ops support and the organization. Okay, I'm up here at corporate. I could provide all the cover to this. So that was good. But when we opened up that center in Anderson, if we didn't have the general manager engaged, it would have never happened. Because he could do to me what I do to the CEO, drag feet on this. He was committed, so I had to pick a leader, or I had to have a leader volunteer who wanted to do this, but who was also a good leader if I was going to do any change, because this is about change. So having those two traits in the person in the area or the operation that's going to happen, a good leader, and a good leader with a heart for this. Because they're the ones who have to answer the day-to-day questions. And our distribution center, frontline managed, all those people you saw in that film had never worked with a person with a disability before in their life. They're the ones who say, now I'm a better man, a better husband, I'm more patient. I like the guy, which has not always been one of my long suits. He would sit there, they would come, what happened? So people were afraid to ask. He would have people write questions. At the end of the day, you write your question that you're afraid to ask in front of the other managers because you look dumb. We'll put it in a hat and pass it around, and he pulled them out one by one. And they talked about them. He didn't have all the answers. He said, what do you guys think? What do you think about it? And sometimes he said, I don't know the answer to this one. Have we had it come up yet? Well, if we hadn't had, we'll figure it out when it comes. Sometimes like honesty. Honesty pays off in this. We didn't have all the answers for this. Okay. This was one, number 9 and 10 are two things I think everybody knows in the buildings. We talk about them all the time. Consistent and objective, flexible in means. That does not mean the ends justify the means. If that means you subvert what you try to hope to do, but let's kill for peace. That's a means versus an end. We're talking about we're consistent and objective. We want that inclusive workforce that's effective. We're willing to fire or modify any policy or procedure. Now here's the key word we can use in business. Pilot. Right? You can do anything under pilot. So I learned to say that very quickly. I say, you know what we're going to do? If something gets in the way, we're going to change it. And we spent millions of dollars putting that in place. You can't do that. Oh, it's a pilot. They go, okay. Just became invisible to them. It's a pilot. Yes, you know that. Everybody in the trenches never anything with a pilot. So what I'm hoping you do is launch a pilot. And that gave us a lot of room because, oh, by the way, and it really is because what we're going to do is learn from it. Managing the gray. This is what we knew that we wanted to empower our managers. Everybody likes rules. People who like rules, it's easy to manage with rules, ironclad rules. Would you agree? Do you like to be governed by ironclad rules? Well, here's the question, and I'll ask this group because I ask every group. This is your choice. In your company, would you like to be governed? Would you like your bosses to come to you and say, here, I have some ironclad rules. You break them, you're gone. You keep them here, you keep the other rules, you're okay. Or would you rather us have principles that we try to adhere to and we kind of go with the flow? If there's an exception here or there, we want everybody to keep their job. We want everybody to be successful, but sometimes it's not, and sometimes we have to make hard decisions. All decisions may not come out in your favor. So that consistency, it's easy to be consistent. Consistency. Consistency is what happens when conditions are universally bad, because we go to the lowest common denominator. Now, which would you prefer? How many of you prefer the rules system? Did y'all understand the question? Okay. How many people want principles? That's generally everybody. So that's what we told managers. Here are the principles we're trying to achieve. We want a good worker is somebody who pulls their weight, helps out when they need to, respects the job, other people around them, and themselves. Kind of another word for not being a troublemaker. And an exceptional employee is all those things plus makes the place better. That's what we're trying to work for. Those are sort of the principles. And we want to be fair, and we want to be able to justify it if we had to stand up in front of anybody to say why we made the decision. Those are sort of, that's called managing in the gray. And we have been rewarded with that. And that's why you heard the guy say, I'm allowed to be flexible with my employee. It's not an either or. You perform this today or you're gone. What they don't want to do is fire anybody in that building, so they work their tails off to make people successful. When I hear managers in that building, they tell me stories. We had this one woman, they told me, Iris, she's teenage boys, had never had a job, been on Social Security her whole life. She has cerebral palsy. We put her on the line, and she has to operate a machine that has a collar around the button. You know what I'm talking about? It's flat. And she could not make rate. And they called in a rehabilitation expert to study it, and he said, I don't think you can accommodate her. You're going to have to let her go. And her supervisor said, I don't think so. He called over a maintenance guy. They looked at it, and they went out to Lowe's. You know, this is a plug for Lowe's because they're doing this. They got a ratchet set and set it over the button, cut off a broomstick, stuck it in there on top so the broomstick sticks above the button, and she can press it, and she can make rate all the time now. Or we had a young man named Jeffrey. Now, Jeffrey was not ultimately successful. Not everything's a happy story. But Jeffrey worked in an area, he has to use a box cutter. And he has an apron and a box cutter, but he had a space issue about people coming in space. So one day he's working. He works on this long line working, and somebody comes in, a custodian comes by with a broom and gets in his area, and Jeffrey gets way upset. And he's working with a knife. So here's this young man waving a knife around, yelling because he's so upset. Can you imagine the reaction of everybody around him? A lot of people say, well, Jeffrey can't work here. What did his supervisor do? Pull the Angie into this program? So this is what they did. They taped off that workspace with masking tape. They went and got a 2x4, stuck it up here, got one of those doorbells at Lowe's that you ring, put that there, put a sign on it that says, please ring bell and wait for Jeffrey to invite you in. And then they got those letters over his work, those big letters you have at birthday parties, Jeffrey's workspace. So it was really visible. I mean, you couldn't miss out. Then they taught Jeffrey, when you hear the doorbell, 1, put knife in apron. 2, turn to the doorbell. 3, invite them in. Wow. And to hear them tell, they invented that. Wouldn't you like to work at a place where that's what management does? Now, he was not ultimately successful. But do they sleep at night? Yes, they do. That's only the standard. Visible support from the top. This is culture change. It always requires to be reminded. There's a thing called the null curriculum. What we don't talk about is not important. What we talk about is important. This is not a fire and forget the first 5 years. Maybe not the first 10 years, because we're overcoming millions of years of evolution about this. It doesn't happen overnight. We talk about it, we remind it, we reinforce it. Community partners, I've talked about that. They're the ones that really make this happen. Be very demanding. A lot of community partners come at us with one specific disability because they're worried about placing people. We had to say, we can't do that. When I was in Connecticut, we were getting ready to open up Connecticut, we had a meeting, Voc Rehab, which is, the state agency that disperses all the money from federal government and state money, had every group in. We had the mental retardation. I know them because they were sitting beside me. And I know the blind people were sitting over here because he said, don't work with them because they're too big a pain. Work with us. We had the deaf people, we had the autism people, we had all these different people who were saying, work with us. And I had to stop the meeting and say, wait a second. From a business perspective, none of your clients are capable of doing the work. That's what the going in position is. If somebody's successful, all the boats will rise. You've got to work together. And oh, by the way, nobody has enough candidates on their own to fill all these jobs. Cooperate. You're in this together. Because guess what? I would tell employers, if you want to try to do this with essentially no risk, start hiring deaf people. Because when you find out in our work, deaf is not much of a disability. And the added thing, there's two added things. Deaf people are so well organized, they know every other deaf person in the community. They'll do the recruiting for you. And the second thing you'll find out is everybody's starting to learn to sign. In our Waxahachie Center near Dallas, all the managers have learned to sign, and it's the biggest problem when the general manager has a meeting, because while he's talking, everybody's signing to each other what he's talking about. So he knows how to sign, and he knows how to sign to say, shut up. I'm talking, and he doesn't miss a note. But there are so many people, they have to work together. TWG, the alternate pipeline, and it's based on the job performance. On the job. I hope I OTJ, not OJT. On the job performance. That's what was our secret. Because they couldn't get through that traditional system. The inspiration, everybody wants to make a difference. There was, when we appeal to them to do something that's never been done, is a huge appeal. And you know what? The field's wide open. The field's wide open on this. There is nobody, I guarantee you, any one of you, or if you came together as a community, we'd like to do this as a community, you'd ring bells across the country. At First Third said, we want to go big time, we want to go across the country with this. You'd ring bells across it. Old National Bank in Indiana really wants to know about you because they want to go big and they're going to put tellers in their back operation. They want to go across the whole state. We don't have a big example in banking. Autism's got a thing now about SAP and software testing. So the opportunity to make a big difference in this space is huge. Is there a community that said in local government we want to hire people with disabilities and where it's representative? Because, oh, by the way, these are our citizens. It's easy to go forward with that. And then what we did, we gave it away. We used to never at the Walgreen Company let anybody in our centers. We were like Michelin. Michelin would never let anybody in their plants. And the reason we didn't let anybody in, it was either one of two reasons. It was because we were so good we didn't want any competitors to see our operation, or we were so bad we didn't want them to know how bad we really were. One of those two. We like to think it was the first one. But when we did this, what gave it power, when I announced this to 5,000 store managers in Las Vegas, what gave it power is I said, and when we're done, we're going to invite all the companies, any company in the world, even our competitors, even dreaded Walmart, in, and we're going to give it all away. And we did. And so most of those companies that came, they came and visited. We said, bring in a team of your managers. Do this. We'll conduct a 1, 2, 3 day workshop out on the floor and actually do this. What is ours is yours. That gives it power. So let's go back. Field of dreams versus point A to point B. What I have observed, some companies, when they want to start this, what we're really good at is process. Would you agree? That's what we organize around that. We have specialties. So when I was at this big conference, there were a lot of companies who were talking about people with disabilities because there's a federal mandate now for federal contractors, 7%. Are any of you under that? Any of you federal contractors? And so there's a 7%, 501c3 or what? No, that's a charity. What's the ruling? What?
Section 503.
503, okay. 501c3 is it? Yeah, okay. And 503?
Is section.
Okay. What? How are they so confusing? There's more numbers than that. That's the directive that says if you're a federal contractor, make best efforts to get 7% of your workforce with a disability. Right? It's required. So as a company, what's the first steps we do as a company when we heard that? Let's go out and get everybody to disclose that we already got. The first step wasn't how are we going to hire more people with disabilities. It was how are we going to get people to disclose. And then at this conference, the other thing we're going to do, we got to organize an employee resource group around this, disabilities. We got to make that an effective group. And then what we ought to do is we need to maybe centralize accommodations, because the best practices say instead of accommodation, we need to figure out how much we're willing to pay for accommodations and get a process around it when somebody asks for it. And what we ought to do is go out to our contractors and our vendors and get them to hire people with disabilities. Have you all done any of those things? Now, how's it doing for employing people with disabilities in your company? Because that's the process. That's why, and the reason I call it the Field of Dreams, that's important for the long run. Those are things in place to support what exists. But it's hard to start from those places. And I call it the Field of Dreams. It's kind of like, we're going to plow this field, we're going to do all these things, and spin around these things, and hopefully the birds from heaven will come down and drop people with disabilities into this. It's important for the long run, but for the short run, I think the shortest distance from point A to point B is to hire people with disabilities. That's what we did. We're going to hire 200 people with disabilities. What do we need to do to support that? That's where it starts. And once you do that, that becomes clarifying, because also we're really good at business at going from here to there. All the creativity is in that. And oh, by the way, there's success at the end we can see, we can measure, we can learn from, and repeat. Success breeds success. Failure even breeds better success next time. All right, so let me kind of tell you, I would do, okay, I got to cover this, and I'm going to cover this. Number 3, have you got the answer? Resources, desire, authority, plan, know-how, opportunity. All right, how many people are voting for resources? You have to have, that's the only one thing you would have. Okay, how many people voted for desire? Okay, and how many authority? How about plan? Plan? Know-how? Opportunity. Now, it's interesting, what would the room, if you voted for one thing, what would it have been? What got the most votes? Desire. When I talk to my peers that are doing this, that's number 1 on their list too. The biggest predictor of success is the desire to do it. No amount of planning, no amount of know-how, no amount of having resources, no plan. And planning is really scary. I always get scared because it's like a field of dreams. I've seen people go in that. Have you seen the planning door at your business? Because it's like everything else. You open the door, go in the planning door, and you don't come out. Because priorities change. There's so many things in here, they don't come out. Planning has its place. But as a critical element, it's a supportive element, an important element, but not the critical. It's desire. I will take the desire on anybody, on a manager that wants to do this, than I would if the know-how. We can get the know-how. We can't build desire. Okay, here's it. When people ask about this, how do I do this? And I mean, many of you might ask this. How do I do this? I say, okay, my experience, there are 4 questions you ought to ask before you ever get to how. First one, why? Why would you want to do this? And why is that important? If you don't know the why, when you try it and something goes wrong, you may not try it again because you don't remember why you got in this in the first place. There's a why that you have deep down that you may not share, but if you do share, will probably be the most convincing convincing thing you could say to the people below you why to do it. You maybe want to say, we're doing this because this gets us a workforce that can do the job, or this is a workforce, by doing this will enhance our brand to customers. That's maybe who you say to the boss, but it's very rarely the underlying why. There's usually when these guys get together, let me kind of tell you what happened. Every year for the last 10 years, there's about 8 executives that get together for one day at my house. So, and I know they want to come because my house is in Gary, Indiana. So you gotta want Gary, Indiana to come there. And I asked that question, why did you do this? Because there's nobody there, the bosses are not there. Why did you really do this? And it invariably comes down to, we were unfairly leaving behind our fellow citizens who could do the job. Do you know that's a powerful motivator to say that? That's why they did it. What's your reason? Now, there's a reason you tell your boss. I told the CEO, we're going to build the best center we could ever build, the most efficient, most cost-effective. Told the board, best return on invested capital. That's what boards like to hear, right? Best return on invested capital. And without sacrificing any of that and no extra cost, we can change the world. We can make a difference, not just in the people lives we touch in their jobs, but their families. We can have generational impact. Is it results? Or is it hiring people with disabilities? Yes. It's an and answer. That's what we told them. Why? What? What is the big dream? Imagine this is going to be successful at your place of work. Looking forward, it's success. You're now at the end of your career and you're looking back. And oh, by the way, I get to go used to go to a lot of retirement parties. I've never had anybody at a retirement party say, boy, we made a lot of money. I've never heard that. It's always about the impact of people on them, or they were able to help somebody, or we made a difference in our community. It's always something like that. Imagine you did this at your company, and it's the end of your career, and you look back, what does this look like? What would you hope for? Not that you'll achieve, but what's that big dream? You know, we dared. And when I sat around with those folks and I asked that question to the other guys, the folks who are doing this, I was shocked by the answer. The senior vice president at DTE says, when we're finished, I want the whole state of Michigan to be the #1 state for hiring people with autism. I want people to come from all over the world to be in Michigan. And I ran around the table and I remember this other guy. He's from Seattle. He says, what I want people to recognize on some of the people, and I remember the ones about autism because they stuck out. He said, I want people to be able to recognize that autism may be the next level of evolution. Those were huge. Nobody said, I think I'd like to hire 20 people this year. Those were big dreams, and they had power to them. And the reason the big dream is important, because on the what's the big dream? Because the big dream helps us determine what we're going to do and not what we're going to do. Because we don't know how we're going to get there or how long it's going to take, but we need to do something that's kind of consistent in getting there, and that's against the big dream is how we measure if we need to change or not. When we had those enclaves, our big dream was inclusion. Our big dream was, like I told, the hope and history. We welcomed them as our own. It's completely inclusive. Full, engaged people. And when that woman said, I'm not one of them, we knew we were off track. Time to readjust towards the big dream. That's why the big dream is important. And along with that, what are you willing to do, not what are you not willing to do? That's really important on this. What are you willing to do? We're willing to change any policy that gets in the way of an inclusive, effective workforce. I'm willing to set aside a number of jobs and set a goal. I'm willing to manage in the gray. And I'm willing to open up our centers, partners to come in and learn our jobs. What are we not willing to do? We're not willing to spend any material amount of money. And we're not willing to lower our standards because that's not consistent with the big dream if we're going to have full inclusion. That was part of the reason we kept the same performance. We weren't willing to do that. Those kind of set the resources around it and the constraints. That's what the what. Now the where are the jobs? Where is the hiring opportunity? And I always like to think of entry level. Why entry level? Because people with experience are probably employed, maybe underemployed, but they're trying to hold on to those jobs as long as they can because it's so tenuous. Entry-level jobs, you don't have all that experience requirement, may have education requirement around it, but there's a bigger pool out there, and you can develop that talent, and there's typically more jobs in entry-level positions. That's a good place to start. And it's not jobs for people with disabilities. Now, when you thought about it on that person with the disability and the job appropriate, do you think it was, what kind of job was that were you thinking of? Did anybody have a line manager as a job? Did anybody have a clerk doing repetitive, routinous work? Because most people come to that. If you were in a grocery store, you would have had the bagger. A lot of people do. What are the jobs? It's up to the supply side to figure out the right people to do those. Start with jobs, not jobs for people with disabilities. And the who. Who is going to be the local champion? Who is that leader? Good at change, good leader, has a heart for it. That's what's required. Then go out to the system. Then you figure out, what does this thing look like? Before you ever get a partner, where do I want to do this? I know who the leader is. I have a number I have in mind. I got all these jobs here. What's the what we call the smallest executable version? You'll see this picture. Can you read that? It says smallest executable version. I'll read it. It moves us towards the big dream. It strikes a balance between the likelihood of success, the movement towards the big dream, what we will learn or prove, and what will also inspire us. When we started, the lowest possible, the smallest executable version was enclaves because we had no experience. Now, and then when we learned that wasn't getting us on track, the opportunity came along to open a whole new center. If we hadn't had a new center, we couldn't have gone as big as we did. We would have done it in our existing operations, which we've done now. But the time came at the right time. We could go big. Smallest executable version. Then it's time to call, and that last one right there says, get the coalition of partners. Here's what it says. Should have the all boats rise attitude. Remember what that was about? All boats rise and they should be open source mentality. When you have a lot of partners, like any business, is we want to sustain ourselves, right? That's what every organization wants to sustain itself, and sometimes that means what I need to do is grow. If I'm not growing, I'm dying. Have anybody heard that phrase? You know, essentially the best model for business, and if you go back to business school, in Michael Porter's book on competitive strategy, it has the forces, competitive forces. Industry competitors, new entrants, innovator, suppliers, employees, and regulations. Those are the things you need to contend against. If you're successful, you have a monopoly. That's called success. A lot of partners, they want to grow. And if they say, I want to do all you, I want to be your partner in all things, I'm the go-to person, and everything has to come through me, that's not going to be that successful. Partners, our lead partner has a coalition and represents all disabilities. All boats rise. When they put out those job descriptions and those requirements, our partner, Dale Thompson, had placed 13 people the previous year, his best year ever. And we were asking for 75 for day one, and to grow to 200 within a year. He went out and formed coalitions with all the agencies in 3 counties, all the schools, gave them all the requirements, said you pre-screen according to these requirements because they understood our jobs, and the first person that we're going to put in the building, the sequence is the best prepared, the most likely to be successful. We're not going to go you, and then you, then you, then you. We're going to take the best people. Because guess what? Everybody's going to have a chance for this. There's enough room for everybody in this. And if people wanted to up the scores so they could kind of get a person in earlier, guess what happens? If they failed, that came back on the people who put them forward. So it was in their interest to be fair about it. And guess what? All the boats did rise. All the boats did rise. Understand the jobs and expectations. That's what we want our partners to do. Find the pre-screen candidates and provide the support through transition and into full employment. Our transitional work group, now it started off at 9 weeks, now it's 7 weeks. They pre-screen according to our jobs. And we have a hiring plan that they adhere to. They bring people in. It's on-the-job training. They're doing real work. We pay them as temps. They provide the job coaches. And once we think they're successful in that 7-week period, they're hired. Then they come as if they started through the front door, and they got, for typically able people, or people come through the front door, it's 7 weeks probation. They have another 7 weeks probation to get up to speed too. But as soon as they come through the transitional work program, they didn't have to do the background check, only the criminal stuff maybe, and the drug test, but not the ones that would typically knock people out. And guess what? In some of our buildings we say, we have some failures every once in a while. Does anybody have problems after they start work? Sure they do. Our partners, they will come in, and if we have a problem, they're still available for us. Help me get somebody out of the ditch. They do that. That's the kind of partner. That's what, and by on the supply side, if we're on the supply side, that's what we got to offer up. Again, the offer that somebody can't refuse. So, now I'm done that part. Anybody got any questions? I got through that pretty quick, didn't I? Before we start talking about this. Yes, ma'am.
Not a question so much, just an observation. I think just going back to your sort of big picture and what's talked about is important, what's not talked about is that continuity past the getting in the door. Because if everybody in the setting doesn't know what the goal is, or even that the person has a disability, when they do that weird thing,
Right.
and it's not communicated even past, maybe the one manager who's aware that they've got a contract with MRS
Right.
or whatever, then it all falls.
Can everybody hear that?
I just feel like that some way to help both the suppliers and the companies who are trying to take a step, but just maybe not taking it wholly enough.
If we don't
Everybody's on board and we all understand what's going on here, and if a new hire does something that's not quite right, how do we put that tape on the floor? How do we explain,
if we have, can y'all hear this question? No.
It's more of a comment
Right.
than a question, I guess, or.
Precisely. If people don't know where you're going, they don't know how to get you there.
So the person sometimes can get through the door, but they don't stay there because of all these other pieces that aren't in place.
Well, we don't have, say, this person, we do not, when this person comes on the floor, this person has a disability. We don't even do that. We say, we're hiring people with disabilities, and we'll tell everybody how many we got in the building. But we don't tell everybody, okay, this person, not everybody, remember, we have a building of 650 people. They don't see that transitional work group who may come in through certain areas. They don't see them in that context. So it's not like everybody, you've come in through, no good deed goes unpunished. I remember somebody claiming one time, well, you're a sheltered workshop, you got so many people with disabilities, that's called a sheltered workshop. I said, show me a sheltered workshop pays $15 an hour. Okay, if that's a sheltered workshop, we need more of it. Or I had somebody that says, well, you know, there's a stigma about coming into the transitional work group. They're marked as people with disabilities. Oh, really? Most people don't know who comes through that door. We know we've got a lot of odd people and weird people, and guess what? We got a lot of weird, typically able people too. We don't, but we had to say, we're doing this with intent.
I guess I agree with you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just saying a lot of times
Right.
the other approach is to say, well, we've got the people out there hitting the trail for, saying, talking businesses into hiring people with disabilities, trying not trying out. And one person that plays of employment.
Right.
So it's just not a buy-in. It's not the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's onesies, twosies.
So if that person's not available to help communicate, then it sort of all falls apart because they've done this hard sell on, oh, just, it'll be okay, just try it. I'm really trying to get people with disabilities into these, I don't know, I'm just babbling, but I
think there's tiers of support. You're absolutely right, and so it can be top down executive, and then it's HR, but then so the JSIF workers and over time, you create a culture where that understanding is just there, and the natural supports are built in. But I think you're right in the beginning. It's without an understanding that this person may have sensory issues or communication issues, that coworker can create a situation where that person doesn't last very long. So I see where you're coming from on that. It's definitely a need at different levels of company.
I just feel like we've been in the mindset so long of trying so hard to place people with disabilities that we're almost, to the point of, yeah, if you'll agree, yay, and then we just sort of let everything.
Well, the problem we have on the supply side too, supply side starts with the client. And they're trying to place a client in my place of business. This is saying, I don't care about your clients. I got jobs. Can you find the right person for my job? That's what the supply side's got to be fixed too. Supply side views each other as competitors. That's got to be fixed. If we have enough demand, we'll eventually fix the supply side. And I will tell businesses, when you start, you're going to be disappointed. The supply side usually cannot respond fast enough. Or they'll say, we don't have this rule, we got this rule, we can't do that, we got to do that. It'll be more frustrating, it will surprise you. But when there's enough demand, all the kinks in the rope, it solves all the other problems. Yes, ma'am.
I'm the supply side, and one of the things that is part of our responsibility is to help change the culture of your businesses. And for example, one thing I learned from Beaumont is they have a thing called lunch and learn. So different topics, that the company wants to share with their employees, and this can be one of them. And it's just a matter of people don't understand what disabilities are. How do I deal with my coworker who I don't understand what his disability is? Just treat them like everybody else. Understanding what different type of disabilities are and what they entail. People don't always have exposure to that. So that lunch and learn type of atmosphere does help, and your suppliers of your people can help educate your workforce and make that change happen.
And we did sensitivity training for all the managers.
Exactly.
I think we did like 2 days worth of it over time. And then we had the question and answer period. And I went out to every center and told them what we were doing, even before we started doing it. And when I told the store managers, I asked, in the 5,000 of them, I asked them at the end, because I didn't know if they were buying into this, if you know somebody with a disability in your family or your neighbor or hold somebody in your heart with a disability, stand up. The Paris Hotel in the round, 5,000 people. 1,000 people stood up. This is something they want to happen. This is a northbound train. And we said this is a northbound train, or southbound trains, eastbound trains. But this is a northbound train. We're going to do something different. And it's got to be done from the top, over and over. Like you say, we're saying the same thing. Anything else? So you know how to do it. Okay, you want to talk about how we get somebody to do it. All right, this is about convincing somebody. A concept sale versus a brand sale. Do y'all remember the days when there were no disposable diapers?
Yeah.
Remember those? Those pails? Well, do you remember what the first disposable diapers was? What brand it was? Pampers. Pampers was the first disposable diaper. And all the ads, when you look at an ad for disposable diapers today, if you can see one, or if anybody watches TV, you got Huggies, you got Pampers, you got all these other kinds. Walgreens brand, which is a really great brand, by the way. Pampers commercials, what were they talking about? They weren't talking about being the best disposable diaper. They were talking about how much better they were than diapers. It was a concept sale. They were selling the concept of a disposable diaper. They weren't selling the brand of Pampers. It was a concept sale. A brand sale is what they're in now. Once the concept's accepted, now we can get into the specific brand. Now in the world of disposable diapers, it's going to be about my diaper versus yours. This is a concept sale, not a brand sale. I'm not placing my people. I'm selling the concept that there are people that can do the work that you can't get to. The concept. We can worry about the details once you buy the concept. I can't sell the brand. I can't pick the wedding, start selling the wedding china before they're sure you want to get married. Think about that. It's a concept. You got to sell the concept, then we can start getting into the details of how we're going to do it. Because I don't know what the smallest executable version will be of success that's going to move us towards the big dream. Is it going to be working with the school systems, bringing some people on board, but I'm very low risk? Or is it going to be something bigger like an enclave? Or is it, I got a greenfield, I got a guy that's never done this before, he's going to open up a new center in Denton, Texas. He calls me up and he said, I'm thinking about hiring people with disabilities. And I said, well, how many are you thinking about hiring? He said, hadn't thought about it, but I think I like the idea. And I said, we opened 4 buildings that have similar technology as you, what we call our low-tech buildings. And our standard was 25%. He said, well, how do you know it works? Because we did it 4 times. So I said, based on the numbers why don't you plan on opening up with 35 people? Now we're getting something. That would be his smallest executable version, because I said, you know what's great about starting up? You don't have a culture, you don't have all your procedures in, you got all this stuff new, you got new management, people are open, there's excitement. Perfect for going big. That can be your smallest executable version. Now, somebody else, we might say, they have an existing operation. If you want to do it lots of different ways. What's the big dream? What's going to get us there? Principles of buyer behavior. Now, this is we got to remember this. People buy on emotion, not the facts. They need the facts to justify the emotional buy. When I ask people, did you use our cost-benefit study? And the supply side is always looking for the Holy Grail. The most convincing cost-benefit study in the world that's going to convince every employer that hiring people with disabilities is good business. I've never seen that work. Somebody asked me after the meeting, says, had you have done a study on the profitability of hiring people with disabilities? I haven't done that study. I haven't been asked that question. I have been asked by skeptics, what's your return on investment of hiring people with disabilities? And you know what the answer to that is? It's the exact same as our return on investments as hiring people who are typically abled. What's yours? They don't have it. We don't do that. Can people either do the job or they can't do the job? We don't go through that with our typically able people. I don't even know how you would go about return on investment. We don't go through that process. There's all that facts have never done it. When I asked Lowe's, I said, did you use our cost-benefit study? He said, I think we looked at it. Why did you hire people with disabilities? Right thing to do. When you talk to the head of the CEO of Colgate, they're big into green. And I remember he had the executives together and he was presenting, they hire a lot of blind people and they do a lot of green stuff. He said, you're such a huge company. Why did you launch these initiatives? Did you do a cost-benefit study? He goes, no. Well, why did you do it? He says, why wouldn't we do it? We know it's good. Why wouldn't we do it? That's why most people deep down, they may be afraid to say that. They want to do it. Then we got to help them with the facts. What's in it for me? Naturally, people like to follow the crowd. The great thing is success breeds success. The one thing about the club is getting big enough that some of the things that we did, people can forget about that. They can go forward and learn. They can go out to P&G and see what they're doing. They can go to Lowe's and see what they're doing. They can go to Starbucks up in Nevada and see what they're doing. They can go to West Marine and see what they're doing. Or they can go to Louisville or Best Buy and see what they're doing. There's enough examples out there. There's going to be enough examples in other industries. Follow the crowd. Benefits versus risk. When I was in consulting, they had a very good graph to teach us, because when you're buying a consulting engagement, you're spending typically, it can be millions of dollars sometimes. So it would be like big sales. And I remember seeing this graph one time, the sales cycle. And on this side, here's decision time. And it said, here's a line here are benefits, here are risks. Don't you love people that face their slides when they talk about it? Okay, so you get, I'll look over here. Okay. Benefits, risk, decision point. When they start off in the selling cycle, what are they focusing on? Risk or benefits? Benefits. When you present this kind of, wow, this could be fantastic, blah, blah, blah. And you can go through this. You can play this with disabilities. Hey, you can make a difference in all these lives. We get a workforce we can't get otherwise. We're going to have better retention, less absenteeism. We're going to have more engaged men. Start talking about the benefits. But as you get closer to the sales cycle, to the decision, boom, what are the risks? Now, if you don't think that graph is true, how many of you ever bought a house? How was it the night before close? It's just a natural thing. So on the supply side, when somebody gets into this decision process and they're getting into the benefits, be aware there is going to be a valley before a decision. And don't deny it, and expose it and deal with it then. I got your back, we can do this, go through that to help them through that. You know, how do we get through that buying a house when we can't afford it? The money will come from somewhere. They can't run us out that quickly. My boat will come in. I mean, I've done it all. Or when somebody from another part of the organization says, we can't do that. We can't do that. Rather than argue with them, why can't we? What's the bad thing will happen? Is that based on fact? Or is there another way around it? But deal with it. Don't just try to get an argument. That's not true. What is it? It's something at the bottom of that. The first objection is not usually the final objection or the real objection. And I could, in our case, the board, what happens if it doesn't work, we'll adjust. And they said, okay, it's kind of like pilot and we'll adjust. Those are the two words that can get you through anything. Or I've got your back. HR, I got your back. It's on me. Legal, it's on me. You advise me best. I acknowledge that. If you'd like me to write it down, I'll write it down. It's in your email. You're covered. But I need your help. So going back to this, we covered that. One little last thing. North wind theory. There's this company in Houston, Texas. When I was I started off at, which is now Accenture. We fell in love with this company because this had a president who claimed he'd read every book on management. He said every book only is worth one idea, and the problem about having all those ideas, you can't remember them. So he came up with this thing called Modelnetics. You can go online and look at it. He's still selling it. And he said he had all these concepts about change or about all these, he called them different grids, and he had these little stories, and they had a name and an icon. And the great thing about it, you could have them on a piece of paper, have them in your pocket, or pull them out of your desk. You ever get in those arguments? You said, at the end of it, or a day later on the way home, you went, I thought of that. We had a little grid for that. And I remember the change grid, north wind theory, and it's a great concept because it became part of the lexicon inside of Accenture, and we get ready to go to client, we got to say, we got a north windom on this. We're really behind on this one. What does it mean? Okay, how is wind created? Is wind created by a high pressure zone from the outside or a low pressure zone from the inside? And here's a tip. When you look at the barometer, what are you looking at? It going up or going down when you're worried about a storm? What's that? Where you got going down. A low pressure zone is where it pulls in the weather. Pulls in the weather. So what essentially that concept means, people don't buy what they don't want to buy. We can't force it on them. We got to figure out what they're trying to buy. The low pressure zone. We've got to help create a low pressure zone to pull in the decision. We can't sell what people don't want to buy. That's part of it, is trying to get on their side of the table to see the world from their side. Now this next two, and I think, and we'll get to number 6 pretty quick. If you're going to remember one thing about this, about how do we get people interested in this, is expose and envision. Problems that are not my problems are not a problem. That's just the way it is. And most people are not exposed to this, have no sense of what it costs society. They wouldn't know about Angie. They would look at a person like Angie and not really think about, gee whiz, Angie versus another person. I'd probably go with the other person. But what about the Angie who sat through 30 of those interviews? Who could do the job? They're not exposed to that. Or they are not aware that, gee whiz, when I was told, I asked somebody, how much money do I need to set aside if I died today for my son to be okay, that he could live in safety? They said, well, you need about $3 million. Wow. What about all those folks in our stores who are hearing that same number? That's what it's going to cost. Who's going to pay for that? What if I have a grandson with a disability? What's that going to look like? Or a granddaughter that looks like for that? Once people are exposed, then the question is, then they're overwhelmed. You know, a lot of people don't want to see bad things because you're overwhelmed. What can I do about it? I don't want to see those kids starving in Africa. Well, what can I do about it? But exposure is the first step. Then the second question has to go with that to help them envision their role, that they can make a difference in this. And it's not to solve the complete problem, because we're not going to solve this. One company's not going to solve this, but oh, guess what? But that's just a start. And when people say you can't make a difference, you know, things have been like this a long way. Don't we say that? I'm just one person. I'm just one company. And problem's too big. There's so many starfish washed up out there on the beach. What does it make any difference? So I just throw one in. Right? You've heard that story? You can't throw them all in. Well, I can throw this one in, and it makes a difference in that one. Or people say you can't change, there's no such thing as systemic change. I was brought up in Texas. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. I got out of high school in 1967, so that was my freshman year, or I started my sophomore year when that Civil Rights Act was passed in the summer. Now, when I was a teenager, still in high school, when I go down to the department stores downtown in Wichita Falls, Texas, there were 2 sets of fountains I was brought up with, and 2 sets of bathroom, white and colored. And even when I was a senior and we go on trips, our bus driver, who was typically African American, and we would stop at a restaurant to eat, we would all go in, and you know where he would go? Around to the back door, because he was not allowed in. Now, I imagine looking back at my peers in the African American community who had suffered this 300 years, and the Supreme Court had passed Jim Crow laws that said that you can't intermarry, that you're supposed to cross, a man is supposed to cross on the other side of the street, supposed to answer to the name boy. The Supreme Court says that's okay, and you can have separate schools, which are separate but equal, but they really weren't equal. If I were my peer, who's my age today, that's the life they live. If you had told him or her that there would be a African American president in your lifetime, what would you have thought then? When there had been 300 years of things that told you that that can't be true. Who made that happen? Who made that happen? The world belongs to the dreamers. If we can dream it to be true, we can make it to become true. That's what I'm talking about. Envision. What can we do to start? We may be working on a dream that may not be our own. My wife gives money to Autism Speaks for research, for curing autism. And I asked her, I said, autism is 27. I don't think it's going to happen in Austin's life. Why are you giving money to them? And you know what she says? Because I do believe it can be cured someday. And I hope not to have a grandchild with autism. That's why we do things. And to be part of that, makes it worth getting up every day. That's the envision. Expose and envision them part of that solution. And now the last thing, don't forget, this is why for a champion. This is what a champion requires. DOA. You said number one. What's D stand for? Desire. What was the O? Remember the opportunity? And what's the A stand for? Authority. That's a champion. In my words, people say they're a champion. They may be an advocate or a resource. There's advocates, there's resource. A lot of times, I would say HR generally, unless you're hiring in the HR department, you can be a champion because they're working for you. But otherwise, if they're working in somebody else's area, you can be a resource, an advocate. But a champion has to have that desire, has to have the opportunity for the hiring, where those people will be hired and the results will be gleaned from and their abilities harnessed. That's the opportunity, and has the authority to do it. That is the trifecta of a champion. Those are the people we got to find. Now, the last part of this assignment, remember the first assignment and the other one I had for you? You guys should have written these down. If you wrote down my phone number, you should have written these down because I'm going to ask you when you call me. Breakout session, when the first one was why. Why would you do this? What would be your big dream? And what would be your smallest executable version? That was your first assignment. To think about is your company. And the assignment here is what would your elevator speech be? Everybody's got to have an elevator speech. If you can do it in 2 stories, that's even better than 100 stories. Here's my elevator speech. There's a whole group of people that can do the jobs as well as better than anybody that we can't get to because of these inadvertent, unintentional walls we built. And as a result, we're condemning people who can do the job, who want to do the job, to a life of poverty. That's it. And we can do something about it. Would you consider it? That's my elevator. But you've got to have your elevator speech. And that's that.